The fluorescent lights of Chicago General cast an eerie glow through the storm as David helped the mysterious woman out of his car. Her bare feet splashed through puddles as they hurried toward the automatic doors, her designer pajamas completely soaked and clinging to her trembling frame. She clutched his arm with surprising strength, her manicured nails digging into his worn jacket sleeve as another wave of pain doubled her over. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Just breathe, David said softly, the same gentle tone he used with his 6-year-old daughter Emma when she had nightmares. We're almost there. He'd found her 20 minutes earlier, collapsed on the sidewalk outside his apartment building in Lincoln Park. At first glance, she looked like just another casualty of Chicago's unforgiving streets, someone who'd maybe had too much to drink, or gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd. But something about her desperation, the way she'd grabbed his hand and begged him not to call an ambulance, had stirred something protective in his chest. The emergency room was chaos, as it always was after midnight. David had spent enough time in hospitals during Emma's early years, when her asthma attacks would send them rushing through these same sliding doors, to know that anyone without insurance or obvious trauma would be waiting for hours. The woman beside him was clearly in serious pain, but she looked more like she belonged at a spa retreat than an emergency room. "Sir, you'll need to fill out these forms," the triage nurse said, sliding a clipboard across the counter without looking up from her computer screen. "Insurance card and ID, please." The woman's face went pale. "I don't have my purse," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "I left everything. I just ran." David watched as the nurse's expression shifted from bored indifference to barely concealed annoyance. He'd seen that look before, the way medical staff sometimes treated people who couldn't immediately prove their ability to pay. It was the same look he'd gotten 3 years ago when Emma had her worst attack and his insurance had lapsed between jobs. David's day had started like every other for the past 3 years. His alarm buzzed at 5:30 in the morning in their cramped one-bedroom apartment on the north side. Emma slept peacefully in the apartment's only bedroom while David made do with the pull-out couch in their tiny living room. The space was barely 400 square feet, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was theirs. By 6:15, he was already dressed in his uniform and quietly preparing Emma's breakfast: cereal with milk, a piece of toast cut into triangles the way she liked it, and her vitamins arranged in a small dish beside her favorite cup. These morning rituals had become sacred to him, small acts of love that made their modest circumstances feel less like struggling and more like simply living. David worked as a night security guard at Morrison Financial Tower, one of Chicago's gleaming downtown office buildings. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep them fed and housed, and the overnight schedule meant he could be home when Emma got back from school. His supervisor, Janet, appreciated his reliability and quiet professionalism. Unlike some of the other guards who spent their shifts scrolling through their phones or dozing at their desks, David remained alert and engaged throughout the long, lonely hours. What Janet and the cleaning crews didn't know was that David spent those quiet midnight hours doing more than just watching security monitors. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. He walked through the empty offices of some of Chicago's most powerful law firms, investment companies, and consulting groups, observing their operations with the trained eye of someone who understood business at levels most people never reached. David held an MBA from Northwestern and had once been a rising star in corporate strategy consulting. Before Emma was born, before his ex-wife Sarah decided that single motherhood wasn't part of her 5-year plan, he'd been on track to make partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms. His analytical mind and natural ability to see solutions where others saw only problems had made him invaluable to Fortune 500 companies seeking to restructure, expand, or navigate complex market challenges. But when Sarah left them both, taking nothing but her designer clothes and leaving behind a 6-month-old baby with severe asthma, David's priorities shifted completely. The demanding travel schedule and 80-hour weeks that had once fueled his ambition suddenly became impossible. Emma needed consistency, medical care, and a father who would be there when she couldn't breathe in the middle of the night. So he'd walked away from everything he'd worked for, trading his corner office and six-figure salary for the quiet dignity of honest work that allowed him to be the father Emma deserved. Some nights, as he walked through those corporate offices in his security uniform, he felt the weight of dreams deferred. But then he'd come home to find Emma's drawings taped to the refrigerator, stick figures of the two of them holding hands under a crayon sun, and he knew he'd made the right choice. David watched as the emergency room's automatic doors slid shut behind them, sealing out the storm but not the chaos that seemed to follow this mysterious woman. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across her face, making her appear even more fragile than she had outside in the rain. Her silk pajamas, now completely soaked, clung to her small frame as she shivered uncontrollably beside him. The waiting room was packed with the usual late-night crowd. A construction worker cradled his bandaged hand while scrolling through his phone. An elderly woman sat quietly with her adult son, both of them wearing the patient expression of people who had been waiting for hours. Near the vending machines, a young mother bounced a crying baby while her toddler slept across two plastic chairs. "Next," called the triage nurse, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of medical equipment and hushed conversations. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and the weary expression of someone who had seen everything the night shift could throw at her. The woman beside David stepped forward, but her legs buckled slightly. David caught her elbow, steadying her as they approached the desk together. Up close, he could see that, despite her disheveled appearance, everything about her spoke of quality. Her pajamas were made of expensive silk, her nails were professionally manicured, and even without makeup, her features had the refined elegance of someone accustomed to the finer things in life. "What brings you in tonight?" the nurse asked, not bothering to look up from her computer screen as her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. "I'm having severe abdominal pain," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started about 2 hours ago and it's getting worse." The nurse finally glanced up, taking in the woman's appearance with undisguised skepticism. Her eyes moved from the soaked pajamas to the absence of any identification or insurance cards, and David could practically see her mentally categorizing this patient as a problem case. "Do you have insurance?" the nurse asked, her tone already suggesting she knew the answer. "Yes, but I don't have my cards with me," the woman replied, wrapping her arms around herself as another wave of pain visibly washed over her. "I can provide all the information you need. My name is Rachel Morrison, and my insurance is through Morrison Financial Group." David's breath caught in his throat. Morrison Financial Group was the company that owned the building where he worked. He'd seen that name on letterheads and business cards scattered across executive desks during his nightly rounds. It was one of Chicago's largest investment firms, the kind of company that managed billions in assets and had offices on 3 continents. The nurse's expression didn't change. "Without insurance cards or identification, we'll need to treat you as a self-pay patient. Do you understand that you'll be responsible for all charges incurred during your visit?" Rachel nodded quickly, though David noticed her hands were shaking now, whether from cold, pain, or fear he couldn't tell. "That's fine. I just need someone to look at this pain. Please." "Take a seat in the waiting area," the nurse said, handing over a clipboard thick with forms. "Someone will call you when a room becomes available." As they made their way to the only 2 empty chairs in the crowded waiting room, David couldn't help but notice how the other patients stared at Rachel. Her expensive pajamas and bare feet made her stand out like a beacon, and not in a good way. He heard whispered conversations starting around them, people speculating about what kind of trouble this woman might be running from. "Let me help you with those forms," David offered, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her. His voice was gentle, the same tone he used when Emma was upset about something at school. Rachel looked at him with surprise, as if she'd forgotten he was there. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "You've already done more than enough. I can take a taxi home when they're done." David studied her face, noting the way she kept glancing toward the entrance as if expecting someone to walk through those doors at any moment. There was fear there, mixed with determination and something else he couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. "My daughter taught me that sometimes people need someone to sit with them when things get scary." For the first time since he'd found her on the sidewalk, Rachel's expression softened slightly. "You have a daughter, Emma. She's 6. David pulled out his phone and showed her his wallpaper, a photo of Emma grinning gap-toothed at the camera while wearing her favorite princess dress. "She's at a sleepover tonight with her friend from school. First time I've trusted anyone else to handle her inhaler routine." Rachel stared at the photo for a long moment. "She's beautiful. You must be a good father." "I try to be." David helped her fill out the medical forms, providing his own address when she hesitated at the contact information section. He noticed that her hands shook as she signed her name, and not just from the cold. As they waited, David found himself studying the other people in the emergency room with the analytical eye that had once made him successful in the corporate world. The way the medical staff moved through the space, the efficiency of their triage system, the quiet desperation of families dealing with medical crises in the middle of the night. It reminded him of his own late-night visits here with Emma, the feeling of helplessness that came with watching your child struggle to breathe. "Morrison Financial Group," he said quietly, remembering her earlier words to the nurse. "That's a big company." Rachel's body went rigid beside him. "You know it?" "I work security in their building downtown, night shift." David kept his voice neutral, but he was watching her reaction carefully. The fear in her eyes deepened, and she glanced again toward the entrance. "Which building?" she asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "The tower on LaSalle Street. 42 floors of glass and steel. Very impressive architecture." David paused, then added casually, "I've walked past the executive offices on the top floor during my rounds. Beautiful views of the lake from up there." Rachel closed her eyes and leaned back in the uncomfortable chair. "The 42nd floor," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Before David could ask what she meant, a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. 3 people in expensive clothing had just walked through the automatic doors, their eyes scanning the waiting room with obvious urgency. The man in front wore a tailored suit despite the late hour, and his presence commanded immediate attention from the hospital staff. David felt Rachel shrink down in her chair beside him, trying to make herself invisible behind his larger frame. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid, and he could see panic building in her eyes. "Friends of yours?" he asked quietly. "My wedding party," she whispered back, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the emergency room. "They're looking for me." The pieces began falling into place in David's mind. The expensive pajamas, the panic, the lack of identification, and now a wedding party, searching the hospitals in the middle of the night. Rachel Morrison wasn't just any patient. She was a bride who had run away from her own wedding. The man in the suit approached the nurse's station with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted immediately. David could hear fragments of his conversation with the triage nurse, words like "missing person" and "family emergency," and quote, "very important that we find her. What do you want me to do?" David asked Rachel, keeping his voice low and calm despite the tension radiating from her body. "I can't go back," she said, her eyes fixed on the group near the entrance. "Not tonight. Not like this. I need time to think." David made a decision that surprised even him. Standing up slowly, he positioned himself between Rachel and the view from the nurse's station, using his body to shield her from sight. "When I say move, walk toward the restrooms. There's a family consultation room down that hallway. Wait for me there." "Why are you helping me?" Rachel asked, confusion mixing with gratitude in her voice. David thought about Emma, about the times when his daughter had needed someone to believe in her when everyone else saw only problems. He thought about his own experience of having his life judged by appearances, of being dismissed because of circumstances beyond his control. "Because sometimes people deserve a chance to make their own choices," he said simply. "Now go." As Rachel slipped away toward the restrooms, David watched the wedding party continue their search. The man in the suit was now speaking with a hospital security guard, his gestures becoming more animated as he described the missing woman. David recognized the type from his years in corporate consulting, someone who was used to controlling situations and people, someone who didn't handle obstacles well. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a security guard helping someone hide from people who were probably convinced they were trying to help her. But something about Rachel's desperation, the genuine fear in her eyes when she saw those three people, told him there was more to this story than a simple case of wedding day nerves. His phone buzzed with a text message. The overnight sitter confirming that Emma was sleeping peacefully and her breathing was normal. David smiled slightly, grateful for the reminder of what really mattered in life. Whatever was happening with Rachel Morrison, whatever drama was unfolding in the world of Chicago's wealthy elite, his first priority would always be getting home safely to his daughter in the morning. But for now, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be. David found Rachel in the family consultation room, huddled in the corner chair with her knees drawn up to her chest. The small space was designed for delivering difficult news to families, with soft lighting and tissues strategically placed on every surface. She looked even smaller in here, like a lost child rather than a grown woman who apparently had some connection to one of Chicago's most powerful financial firms. "They're still out there," David said quietly, closing the door behind him. "The man in the suit is talking to hospital administration now. He seems to have some pull here." Rachel's laugh was bitter and hollow. "That's my fiancé, Marcus. Sorry, former fiancé. His family has donated millions to this hospital. Half the cardiac wing is named after his grandfather." David settled into the chair across from her, maintaining a respectful distance, while trying to read the complex emotions playing across her face. "So you really did run away from your wedding. 3 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle at the Palmer house," Rachel confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. 500 guests, a reception that cost more than most people make in a year, and I was standing there in my $10,000 dress, realizing I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The pain that had brought her to the emergency room seemed to have subsided slightly, but David could see that emotional anguish had taken its place. Her hands were no longer shaking from physical discomfort, but from the weight of whatever decision had driven her to flee into the Chicago night in her pajamas. "What changed your mind?" David asked, though he suspected the answer was more complicated than simple cold feet. Before Rachel could respond, her phone began buzzing insistently from where she'd placed it on the small table between them. The screen lit up with incoming calls from various contacts: Marcus, Mom, Wedding Coordinator, Dad. Each name that flashed across the screen seemed to add another layer of tension to her already strained expression. "I found something," she said finally, declining another call from Marcus. "About an hour before the ceremony, I went to Marcus's office to surprise him. I had this romantic idea about giving him a letter I'd written. Something personal before we became husband and wife." David waited patiently as Rachel gathered her thoughts. In his years of security work, he learned that people often needed time to find the words for the things that mattered most. His computer was open to an email chain with his lawyer. Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger with anger. "They were discussing something called a succession plan. Apparently, marrying me wasn't about love. It was about positioning himself to take over Morrison Financial when my father retires." The pieces were falling into place for David. Morrison Financial Group, the 42nd floor of his building, Rachel Morrison. "Your father owns the company, built it from nothing over 30 years, Rachel confirmed. And Marcus has been working there for 2 years, supposedly proving himself worthy of my father's trust and my hand in marriage. Except the emails made it clear that he's been feeding inside information to competitors while positioning himself as the natural successor to Dad's empire." David felt a familiar analytical calm settling over his mind, the same state that had once made him invaluable in corporate crisis situations. What kind of inside information? Client portfolios, investment strategies, acquisition targets. Enough to cost us hundreds of millions in lost opportunities and compromised negotiations. Rachel's hands clenched into fists in her lap. "And I was about to give him legal access to everything by becoming his wife." The sound of voices in the hallway outside made them both freeze. David recognized Marcus's voice, now clearly agitated, as he spoke with what sounded like hospital security. The conversation was moving closer to their location. "Miss Morrison needs medical attention," Marcus was saying, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "She's not thinking clearly. We're very concerned about her mental state." Rachel's eyes went wide with panic. He's going to have me committed. If he can convince them I'm having some kind of breakdown, he can control the narrative. Make it look like I'm unstable, unfit to inherit anything. David's mind raced through possibilities. He understood corporate politics well enough to know that perception often mattered more than reality in situations like this. If Marcus could establish a pattern of Rachel being mentally unfit, especially with witnesses from a prestigious hospital, it could devastate her credibility in any future legal proceedings. "We need to get you out of here," David said. But even as he spoke, he could hear footsteps stopping right outside their door. She was seen heading toward the consultation rooms, a hospital security guard was saying. "We'll check each one systematically." Rachel looked trapped, her breathing becoming shallow again as the voices grew closer. "There's nowhere to go. The windows don't open, and they'll see us if we try to leave through the main hallway." David stood up and moved to the small window that looked out over the hospital's loading dock area. 3 floors down, he could see the employee parking garage where his Honda sat among the cars of night shift workers. The storm was still raging outside, but the rain had lessened slightly. "I have an idea," he said, "but you're going to have to trust me completely." Before Rachel could respond, the door handle turned. David quickly moved to block the entrance as Marcus stepped into the room, flanked by a hospital security guard and a woman in scrubs who appeared to be some kind of administrator. "Rachel, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Everyone's been so worried about you. You disappeared right before our wedding. You're clearly not well." David found himself studying Marcus with the same attention he'd once used to analyze corporate executives during high-stakes negotiations. Everything about the man was calculated, from his perfectly styled hair despite the late hour, to the way he positioned himself to appear protective while actually blocking Rachel's exit from the room. "Sir, you'll need to step aside," the hospital administrator said to David. "This is a family matter." "Actually," David replied calmly, "Ms. Morrison is an adult who came here seeking medical treatment. She has the right to privacy and to make her own decisions about her care." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he really looked at David for the first time. "And you are?" "Someone who found her, collapsed outside my apartment building and brought her here for help," David said evenly. "Which, last I checked, was the decent thing to do." "This man could be anyone," Marcus said to the administrator, his tone suggesting David was some kind of threat. "He could have been trying to take advantage of Rachel in her confused state. We don't know his intentions." David felt the familiar sting of being judged by his appearance, the assumption that his security uniform and modest circumstances automatically made him suspicious. But he also recognized the strategy Marcus was employing, using David's working-class status to undermine his credibility while positioning himself as Rachel's protector. "My intentions," David said quietly, "are to make sure Ms. Morrison gets the medical care she needs and has the right to make her own choices. Nothing more, nothing less." Rachel stood up slowly, finding her voice for the first time since Marcus had entered the room. "I don't want to see you, Marcus. I don't want to go anywhere with you. I want you to leave." "Sweetheart, you're in shock," Marcus replied, his tone patronizing. "Running away in your pajamas, trusting strangers, hiding in hospitals. This isn't like you. Let me take you home so we can talk about whatever's troubling you." "What's troubling me," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger, "is finding out that the man I was about to marry has been betraying my family's company for 2 years. What's troubling me is realizing that our entire relationship was a business strategy." Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, and David caught a glimpse of cold calculation in his eyes before the concerned fiancé expression returned. "You're obviously not thinking clearly. Dr. Peterson here can help us understand what's happening with you medically." The administrator, Dr. Peterson, looked uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in her hospital. "Ms. Morrison, if you're experiencing pain, we should get you properly examined. And if there are concerns about your mental state—" "There are no concerns about my mental state," Rachel said firmly. "I'm a Harvard MBA who runs 3 divisions of my father's company. I found evidence of corporate espionage and fraud, and I made a rational decision not to marry the person responsible for it." David watched the power dynamics shift in the room. Rachel was finding her strength, remembering who she was beyond the vulnerable woman he'd found on the sidewalk. But Marcus was clearly not going to give up easily, and David could see him calculating his next move. "If that's true," Marcus said smoothly, "then you won't mind if we call your father and let him sort this out. I'm sure he'd want to know where his daughter is on what was supposed to be her wedding night." Rachel's newfound confidence wavered slightly. "My father has been planning this wedding for months. He's invested so much in making it perfect, in our future together. If I tell him what I found, it will break his heart," Marcus finished, his tone suggesting he understood exactly how to manipulate this situation. "Your father trusted me with his company and his daughter. Accusations like these, without proof, could destroy everything he's worked for." David realized this was the real crisis. Not Rachel's physical pain, not even her decision to run from the wedding, but this moment where she had to choose between protecting her father's feelings and protecting his life's work. Marcus was betting that family loyalty would win over business logic, that she would choose silence over action. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the window and the distant hum of hospital machinery. David could see Rachel wrestling with an impossible choice, trapped between her love for her father and her responsibility to save him from a betrayal he didn't even know was happening. David watched the tension in the small room reach a breaking point. Rachel stood frozen between two impossible choices, while Marcus waited with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was cornered. The hospital administrator shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to resolve this situation quickly and quietly. "Ms. Morrison," Dr. Peterson said gently, "perhaps we should focus on your medical concerns first. Everything else can wait until you're feeling better." But David could see that Rachel's physical pain had been largely overshadowed by the emotional crisis she was facing. Her breathing was steady now, her posture stronger, but her eyes held the weight of someone who had discovered that her entire life had been built on deception. "Actually," David said quietly, "I think there might be another way to handle this situation." All eyes turned to him, and he felt the familiar calm that had once made him successful in corporate boardrooms. The same analytical mind that had helped Fortune 500 companies navigate complex crises was now focused on helping a woman he'd known for less than 4 hours. "Marcus," David said, addressing him directly, "you mentioned that accusations without proof could be damaging. That suggests you're confident no such proof exists." Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "I don't know what you're implying, but I don't appreciate being questioned by someone who has no stake in this situation." "Fair enough," David replied evenly. "But if Rachel is making false accusations based on emotional distress, as you suggest, then surely you'd welcome the opportunity to clear your name. A simple review of the evidence she claims to have found would resolve this immediately." The silence that followed David's suggestion was telling. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and David recognized the micro-expression of someone who had just realized they were in a more dangerous position than they'd anticipated. "I don't see how this is any of your business," Marcus said, his tone growing colder. "Rachel is clearly having some kind of breakdown, and she needs professional help, not encouragement from strangers." "I'm not having a breakdown," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger. "David is right. If you're innocent, you should want to prove it. The emails are still on your computer. The evidence is all there." Dr. Peterson looked between them uncertainly. "Perhaps we should contact hospital security and let them sort this out. This is getting beyond medical care." But David could see that Rachel was finding her courage again, remembering her own strength and capability. "Dr. Peterson, may I use your phone to call my father?" "Rachel." "No," Marcus said quickly, dropping the patronizing tone. "Think about what you're doing. Your father's health isn't good. The stress of these accusations on your wedding night could trigger another heart episode." David filed away this new information. Rachel's father had health problems, which added another layer of complexity to her decision. Marcus was using every emotional lever he could find to prevent her from exposing his betrayal. "My father is stronger than you think," Rachel said, though David could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. "And he deserves to know the truth about what's been happening to his company." "What he deserves," Marcus replied, "is to enjoy his daughter's wedding and the knowledge that his life's work will be in good hands, not to be destroyed by paranoid fantasies on what should be the happiest day of his life." David recognized the manipulation tactics Marcus was employing, the way he was weaponizing Rachel's love for her father against her business judgment. It was a sophisticated form of emotional blackmail, designed to make her question her own perceptions and prioritize short-term peace over long-term consequences. "Rachel," David said gently, "in your business experience, what happens when corporate fraud goes unreported?" Rachel looked at him with surprise, perhaps not expecting such a sophisticated question from someone in a security uniform. "The damage compounds exponentially. Early intervention is always less costly than late discovery." "And what happens to company leadership when they're found to have ignored warning signs?" "They're held liable for negligence," Rachel replied, her business training taking over. "The board, the shareholders, regulatory agencies. Everyone assumes leadership either knew and covered it up, or should have known and didn't do their due diligence." David nodded. "So really, the question isn't whether to tell your father. It's whether to tell him now when something can still be done about it, or later when the damage is irreversible and everyone will wonder why you stayed silent." Marcus's composure was beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous. You're listening to conspiracy theories from a security guard who has no understanding of how real business works." The dismissive comment hung in the air like a challenge. David felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, but this time it came with an opportunity. Marcus had just revealed his own arrogance and given David an opening he hadn't expected. "You're right," David said calmly. "I am just a security guard, but I walk through corporate offices every night, and I've learned to recognize patterns. The late-night meetings, the private phone calls, the documents that get shredded immediately after printing." Marcus's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" 42nd floor of Morrison Financial," David continued, his voice steady and measured. "Conference Room B, where you've been meeting with representatives from Castellane Capital every Tuesday at 11 p.m. for the past 6 weeks. I assumed it was legitimate business, but now that Rachel mentions information being leaked to competitors, the room went dead silent. David could see Rachel processing this new information, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. Dr. Peterson looked completely lost, while Marcus appeared to be calculating whether to continue denying everything or try a different strategy. "You've been watching me," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I've been doing my job," David replied. "Part of security is noting unusual patterns. Late-night meetings with outside parties, especially when those parties request that their visits not be logged in the official registry, tend to stand out." Rachel's eyes widened. "You keep records of after-hours visitors?" "Standard protocol," David confirmed. "Time, date, duration of visit, and photo identification for anyone who isn't a regular employee. It's all stored in the security database." Marcus realized the trap he'd walked into. His face went through a series of expressions as he understood that his carefully planned deception had been inadvertently documented by the very security system he'd probably never thought to consider. "Those meetings were perfectly legitimate," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Castellane Capital is exploring a potential partnership with Morrison Financial." "A partnership that your future father-in-law doesn't know about?" David asked. "One that requires meetings in the middle of the night with instructions to keep them off the official visitor logs?" Rachel was staring at Marcus now with complete clarity. The last vestiges of doubt or emotional confusion had disappeared, replaced by the sharp analytical mind that had made her successful in the corporate world. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Rachel, I can explain everything," Marcus began, but she cut him off. "How long have you been selling information to Castellane Capital?" Marcus looked around the room desperately, perhaps hoping for an ally or an escape route. But Dr. Peterson was clearly out of her depth with corporate espionage, and David was watching him with the patient attention of someone who had seen this type of crisis many times before. "It's not what you think," Marcus said finally. "Yes, I've been in contact with Castellane, but it's not about betraying your father. It's about positioning Morrison Financial for the future. Your father is going to retire soon, and the company needs leadership that understands modern market dynamics." "Leadership like you," Rachel said, her voice flat. "Leadership like us," Marcus corrected. "Rachel, we could have built something incredible together. Combined Morrison's client base with Castellane's resources and my strategic vision. Your father would have been taken care of, and we would have created a financial empire." David watched Rachel process this final revelation. Marcus wasn't just stealing information. He was planning a complete takeover of her father's company. using their marriage as the legal mechanism to make it appear legitimate. "The succession plan in the emails," Rachel said, understanding flooding her voice. "You weren't just planning to inherit leadership of Morrison Financial. You were planning to merge it with Castellane and eliminate it entirely." Marcus's silence was confirmation enough. In the quiet of the hospital consultation room, the full scope of his betrayal had finally been exposed. Not just corporate espionage, but a systematic plan to destroy everything Rachel's father had built while using his daughter's love as the weapon to accomplish it. David felt a familiar satisfaction, the same feeling he'd once experienced when helping companies identify and resolve existential threats to their survival. But this time, instead of saving a faceless corporation, he'd helped save a family legacy and possibly prevented a brilliant woman from making the most devastating mistake of her life. Rachel pulled out her phone with steady hands. "Dr. Peterson, thank you for your patience, but I think my medical emergency has resolved itself. I need to call my father now." Marcus made one last desperate attempt. "Rachel, please. Think about what this will do to your family, to your father's legacy, to everything we've built together." "You're right," Rachel replied, her voice calm and certain. "I am thinking about my family and my father's legacy. That's exactly why I'm making this call." 6 weeks later, David was finishing his security rounds on the 42nd floor when he noticed a light still on in what used to be Marcus's office. Through the glass walls, he could see Rachel sitting at the desk, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents. It was well past midnight, but she looked focused and energetic rather than tired. She noticed him passing by and waved him over. David hesitated for a moment, then entered the office that had been completely transformed since Marcus's abrupt departure from the company. "Working late again?" David asked, noting the coffee cup and the scattered papers that suggested she'd been there for hours. "Cleaning up the mess Marcus left behind is more complicated than we initially thought," Rachel replied, gesturing to the documents spread across her desk. "But we're making progress. The partnership with Henderson & Associates is helping us recover most of what was lost to Castellane." David nodded, remembering the media coverage from a few weeks earlier. The story of corporate espionage and a runaway bride had captured public attention, but the business community had been more interested in how Morrison Financial had managed to turn a potential disaster into a strategic advantage. "How's your father handling everything?" David asked. Rachel smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression he'd seen from her since that night in the hospital. "Better than I expected." It turns out he'd had his own suspicions about Marcus for months, but hadn't wanted to say anything because he thought I was happy. Finding out I was having doubts too was actually a relief for him. She stood up and moved to the large windows that looked out over Chicago's skyline. The city lights twinkled like stars against the dark lake beyond, and David could understand why executives paid premium prices for offices with these views. "I never properly thanked you," Rachel said without turning around. "Not just for helping me that night, but for giving me the courage to trust my own judgment. I was so close to convincing myself that keeping quiet was the right thing to do." David joined her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance while appreciating the view he usually only saw during his solitary night rounds. "You would have figured it out eventually. You're too smart and too principled to let something like that slide indefinitely." "Maybe," Rachel replied, "but the damage would have been so much worse." Marcus had already started moving client assets into Castellane's management structure. Another few months, and we might not have been able to recover anything. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. David found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since that stormy night when he'd found a mysterious woman in pajamas outside his apartment building. "I have something for you," Rachel said, moving back to her desk and pulling out an envelope. "It's a job offer. Chief of Corporate Security for Morrison Financial, with a salary that's probably 10 times what you're making now." David took the envelope but didn't open it. "Rachel, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept this." Her face fell slightly. "Is it the salary? We can negotiate. I know your background now, David. I looked you up after that night. Northwestern MBA, 15 years in corporate consulting, partner track at Brennan & Associates before you left to raise your daughter. You're overqualified for a security position, not underqualified for an executive role." David smiled at her research efforts. It's not about qualifications or money. It's about priorities. Your daughter, Rachel said, understanding immediately. Emma starts kindergarten in the fall, and she's finally got her asthma under control with a new treatment plan. The night shift works for our schedule. It lets me be there when she gets home from school. Help with homework, make dinner together. Those things matter more to me than corner offices or executive titles. Rachel studied his face with the same analytical attention she probably used in boardroom negotiations. You really mean that? I really do, David confirmed. I spent years chasing professional success, and it nearly cost me everything that actually matters. Emma needs a father who's present and engaged, not one who's building an empire. But surely there's some way we can work together, Rachel pressed. Your insights that night, the way you analyzed the situation, and helped me see clearly through all the emotional manipulation, that's exactly the kind of strategic thinking Morrison Financial needs. David opened the envelope and glanced at the offer letter inside. The salary figure was indeed impressive. More money than he'd made even at the peak of his consulting career. But he folded it back up without reading the details. How about a compromise, he suggested. I keep my current job, but Morrison Financial puts me on retainer as a security consultant. A few hours a week, flexible schedule, focused on identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities that regular security audits might miss. Rachel's eyes lit up. That could work. Actually, that could work perfectly. We need someone who understands both corporate strategy and ground-level operations. Someone who sees patterns that others miss. And I need work that challenges me intellectually without compromising my responsibilities as a father, David replied. Plus, Emma loves hearing stories about problem-solving. She's already decided she wants to be a detective when she grows up. They shook hands on the arrangement, and David felt the satisfaction of finding a solution that honored both his professional capabilities and his personal values. It was a reminder that success didn't always mean choosing between different priorities. Sometimes it meant finding creative ways to honor them all. As David prepared to continue his security rounds, Rachel called after him. David? That night in the hospital, when you decided to help me instead of just walking away, what made you do it? David paused at the doorway, thinking about how to explain a decision that had been more intuitive than rational. My daughter taught me that everyone deserves someone to believe in them when they're scared. You were scared, but you were also strong enough to do the right thing once you had support. I just tried to be the support you needed. Well, Rachel said, settling back into her chair with renewed energy, I hope someday I can return the favor. David smiled as he headed back into the corridor. You already have. You reminded me that helping people solve their problems is what I do best, whether it's in a boardroom or a hospital or anywhere else. That's worth more than any salary. As he walked through the quiet halls of Morrison Financial, David felt the deep contentment that came from knowing he'd found the right balance in his life. Tomorrow morning, he'd go home to Emma and help her get ready for another day of first grade. Tomorrow evening, they'd work together on her latest art project, while she told him about her friends and her dreams and all the small adventures that made up a 6-year-old's world. And next week, he'd spend a few hours consulting with Rachel on Morrison Financial's security protocols, using his analytical skills to protect a company and a family that had become important to him. It wasn't the life he'd planned 15 years ago when he was climbing the corporate ladder with singular focus, but it was a life built on values that mattered, relationships that endured, and the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.